everybody, welcome. We're so glad to have you here. About 5 after, we will not wait too much longer to get started. Thank you so much for being a part of this. I'm going to go ahead and dive in. My name is Colleen, and I'm on the Battery programming team. I'm really glad to welcome you to our second Women of the Battery event. Of course, I'm really pleased to be working alongside Kristin, Hayden, and Leti, who are my two co-chairs. They together really spearheaded this event for tonight. As you know, all of our conversations for Women of the Battery will really center around women, power, and influence. And in the realm of these two topics, it's important that we talk about the election coming up, and we're focused on women in politics, particularly in these polarizing times, about the important conversations that we can have across political differences. It's demonstrated that women are particularly adept at leading across differences, and so we've invited two women to join us in conversation on this important topic. Just a couple of housekeeping items. We do have you all on mute just for the time being. We will be doing a Q&A later on. And so you'll want to send those questions to Leti in the chat. And after that, we will take everyone off and we'll move to happy hour and our cocktail demo and then our small group discussions. So sit back and we'll just start with the panel tonight. And so Leti, I'll pass it off to you.
Yep, thanks, Colleen, and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for taking this time to come together with us. That is the theme of tonight's conversation, which is together and how we can come together, particularly during these somewhat polarizing times. The idea is that we can remember how to come together through civic discourse, that it is possible, and that we can lead as women into the future wherever we are. So I'm going to quickly turn it over to my co-host, Kristin Hayden, but before I do that, one more logistical note as a reminder. As you are hearing this wonderful conversation, if you have questions along the way, please put them into the chat to me in particular. I'm going to be moderating that, and we'll be happy to answer questions as time permits. And also just as a reminder that our intention is to have as inclusive a conversation as possible, and that we assume best intentions, full capability of each other, and compassion. At the end of the programming segment, we'll then go into a cocktail and happy hour into breakout rooms where we'll have a chance to actually introduce ourselves to each other and to talk with each other, to have a discussion about what we heard today, and have a fun experience and come back together to close out the evening. So with that, I will pass it on to Kristin.
Great, thanks you, Leti. Hello, Women of the Battery. Very excited about this conversation today. I have to say I'm still hoping we can meet in person sometime soon. I actually went to our club for the very first time since COVID last week. With Leti up on as we know, the outdoor spaces are open. So that was really weird and great to be social again in the penthouse. So I encourage you, if anybody feels comfortable to do that, to visit the club. This conversation, again, as both Leti and Colleen have mentioned, I feel like this too, that in my lifetime, this is one of the most polarizing times that we've ever experienced. And with that, I want to share that many of you know I'm the Chief Partnership Officer of Ignite, and I also recently served as the co-CEO of Reflect Us, which is a coalition of all the leading nonpartisan women's political organizations. And that experience was actually very, very, very positive for me. And that is how I met and got to know so well my colleagues who are going to be speaking here tonight, Mindy and Larissa. Larissa was actually the co-CEO with me for a while, and both Larissa and Mindy serve on the boards and were founding members of the coalition. And through that work, I came to really appreciate their perspectives. I have to say, just to state the obvious, we're all based in San Francisco in the Bay Area. We know that in the Bay Area, we're a very left-leaning, not everybody, of course, but the majority of folks seem to be very progressive in their politics and very left-leaning. And one of the things I appreciate about the coalition, and particularly why I invited Mindy and Larissa here today, is that I feel like we're missing more of the civic discourse conversation across difference that we were regularly having in the work that we were doing in the coalition. So Mindy and Larissa are both leaders in that space, in more of the right-leaning space, right-leaning center. Again, I'll let them talk about however they identify themselves, but I've learned a lot with spending time and working with them, and I wanted to share those learnings and conversations, particularly in this context, as it seems to get more and more polarizing every single day, particularly even with the recent news of RBG's passing last Friday. So with all of that, I'm going to give quick introductions. So Larissa is the co-founder and president of Women's Public Leadership Network. And that organization is the first of its kind, really focusing on center-right women across the political divide. She's also co-founder of the Catalyst PAC. She's a policy expert, a political strategist. She has more than a decade of leadership experience in Capitol Hill. She also served on the transition team for President Trump. And as I mentioned, she recently served with me as the co-CEO of Reflect Us. And she is based in Atlanta, Georgia. That's Larissa. And Mindy Finn wears many hats. She's the founder of Empowered Women, the CEO of Citizen Data, the co-founder of Stand Up Republic, all working to make elections more inclusive. She has a bunch of awards: Washingtonian's 100 Tech Titans, Politico's 50 Politicos to Watch, and Ad Age's 40 Under 40 Leading Innovation in Media. She worked as a digital strategist for the Republican Party, most notably for George W. Bush and Mitt Romney for their campaigns. And then she was actually a vice presidential candidate for Evan McMillan's 2016 presidential campaign. And she is based in Washington, D.C. One thing I did not know about you, Mindy, which maybe you can comment on later, but according to Wikipedia, it says you are credited for launching the Never Trump hashtag. So we're kind of curious to hear more about that. But again, I've had the pleasure of working with both of these folks, and I want to just kick this off by saying I also heard this really great fun fact that has been helpful to remember. Did you know that Americans are more likely to change their spouse than they are their political party? Apparently 17% of Americans are on their second or third spouse, and only 5% have changed their political parties. I thought that was super helpful to remember. And I remember my great-grandmother always saying, always vote for the party, not the man. Note the word man. So that was the message that I was given at a young age, although I love asking people, like, what was their political awakening? For me, it was at age 15, going to South Africa during apartheid as an exchange student. That was my political awakening, and really my commitment to social justice and examining structural racism, not only abroad, but it got me reflecting on what's happening in our own country. And I'm definitely like a poster child for why women, all the reasons I didn't get involved with politics, because I just thought it was like ugly business, and how they picked people apart. And particularly me, not only as a woman, but as a gay woman, I really didn't see a lot of modeling out there. So I feel like late to the game. Now I understand how important it is to be sitting at at the decision makers table. But Mindy, let's start with you. I kind of want to hear what was your political awakening story? How did you get into this work?
Yeah, so I think my first political, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Kristin. It's great to do an event with you and to be here with kind of some of your network. Seeing that beautiful picture of the club, it does make me sad we're not there in person, but it's nice to be doing it from the home office too. So, I think that my first political awakening was just at a very, I actually grew up with a single mom, and she was incredibly busy working. And so, obviously she influenced my life, but there was there was a family next door that I spent a lot of time with. And I remember, and actually it was the man of the house that had volunteered and was very involved in a state legislative campaign locally for where we lived. And they were going to be going to the election night party, and they invited me to come along because I was friends with the kids next door. And that was really, I was maybe like 7 or 8 years old, and all the kids there were running around having a great time. I mean, it was a typical election night party, and I was really glued to the television. Like, I remember they had this television there on a cart, like the old big box TV, and I was there with like a small group of elderly people just like glued to the TV the whole time. This whole idea of that people were casting their vote, and some people were casting a vote for one candidate and the other, and you could have this choice, and then you saw these results come in. I just found it entirely fascinating. So often, like when I think back to the first time I got excited about politics, it was really that. And then there's been many of those moments along the way. I think my real more adult political awakening, and why I ended up kind of taking a more political path as an adult, is that I originally started as a journalist, actually, and I was doing an internship my senior year of college in Washington, D.C., where the idea was that you would cover, you were basically the congressional correspondent for a local paper that couldn't afford to have their own correspondent in Washington, so they allowed students to do it. So I was a congressional correspondent for the Waterbury Republican American, which is not a Republican paper. That's actually just the name of the paper, for Waterbury, Connecticut. It was Joe Lieberman's home district, actually, if people remember Joe Lieberman. And it turned out that the first day on the job, I had come to Washington about a few days prior, and then my first day kind of working for the paper, where I was planning to go to Capitol Hill and meet all the press secretaries for the members that I'd be covering, was 9/11. And so suddenly, as a 20-year-old, I was thrust into this role of being the eyes and ears on the ground, like literally the reporter for that district covering 9/11. And so we're typically, they just expected whatever I wrote would be like back then we actually like read the newspaper. What I wrote would be back of A-section stuff. Like, no one really cared. It was 2001. Like, we'd gone through this like contested presidential election, but it was supposed to be a whole agenda on domestic policy. Like, no one cares. I mean, I care, but in the country didn't care that much. And then all of a sudden, everything I wrote the entire semester, like pretty much every day, was on the front page. Anyway, so I could say more about that, but what I really took away from that experience, I realized that I did not want to be a journalist. And one of the main reasons actually is because I kept being told, like, as a journalist, you can't have an opinion. And I've had an opinion. And so now that has changed a lot, actually, but back then it was just like, you really can't have an opinion. And so I had an opinion, and I got to really see the inner workings of Capitol Hill, and I felt like I wanted to go do something and really work on solving problems, like be on the front lines of solutions. And so as soon as I graduated, I actually went and got a job on Capitol Hill.
Awesome, thanks. Wow, yeah, journalism was different then, as well as politics, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
Larissa, what would you say was your political awakening that got you on this journey? And of course, many more.
So first, hi to everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I think I should say that it says a lot about Kristin and the Battery that you guys host an event like this and allow for these kind of conversations to happen, because I know that not very many people are having these kind of cross conversations. So just wanted to let you know that I very much appreciate that, and I appreciate being here. So interestingly, I know Kristin didn't mention this, but my family is actually from San Francisco. My mom's family started a real estate company back in like the 1900s. that's still around today. And so interesting, I have kind of that background on one side, and then the other side, my father's side is Mexican, and he's a small business owner. My mom it still is, works in the school system, the public school system. And the reason I bring that up is because I grew up very much entrenched in public service. My family, since the time I was small, has always volunteered for a number of different things. So I always knew I wanted to do something that gave back to the community. It wasn't really until actually I was in high school in California. I went to a number of different schools across the country, 3 different high schools in 3 different states. But I happened to be in Danville, California for my sophomore year of high school. And I had a really awesome teacher who really kind of inspired in me to learn more about political systems in other countries and kind of all the different challenges that inform how they currently were run and how that compared to the US. And then just because I'm a huge dork, I also did, AP government and Model UN and all those other pieces. But really, a lot of what kind of informed my current path was that in college, I went to the University of Georgia, and I worked for something called the Center for International Trade and Security. So I worked more actually in the international security space. So that got me very much involved in the policy side of things. And so I too went to Capitol Hill and worked for a congressman and a couple of senators out of when I graduated. But what that did is actually shifted my focus to the domestic. And I'm involved in politics because that is the vehicle by which we are able to do policy. And so for me, I'm actually not necessarily a political person by nature. I'm a policy wonk, but we can't really get at the heart of really figuring out policies that work for the broadest number of people until we learn how to navigate politics and use it to get us the people that we want at those tables. So I started just kind of like Mindy, you get inspired based on issues that are kind of close to your heart, and then learn how to get the results and the policy solutions that you're looking for.
Thank you. And Mindy, well, actually, this is to both of you, but Mindy, you can start. You're both founders of multiple things, and I referenced your current work. A lot of it supporting center-right women. Why did you start these organizations? What was the gap or the need that you saw? And how is it unique in the space? I mean, I find it unique in the space, but if you could share with the group. Mindy, want to start with you?
Yeah. Well, I think just inherently, I obviously believe in women in leadership. I was sort of told by my mother I could do anything I wanted to do. I saw that as an example in her. As I mentioned, she was a single mother, and she worked in business. She was an accountant, but she worked her way up and ended up being the CFO of a company in Houston. But I saw the barriers she had to face too. And so I was really into this women's piece. I didn't know that I would get into it, but it became pretty clear to me in my early years of politics just how few women there were represented in leadership. And I wanted to do something about that. For me in particular, when I have 3 children, actually, when I had my first child, it became kind of even more clear to me, like that additional barrier that mothers face. And it was after that I started my organization. But the gap I really saw was that it seemed that women's empowerment was divided or at risk of being divided along partisan lines. That the idea of feminism or the idea that we want to see parity or just in general more women in leadership, that the idea of just gender equality was at risk of being divided along partisan lines. And yet my own experience, because at that point I had spent a lot of time working in kind of the belly of the beast of the Republican Party, Capitol Hill, committees and campaigns, was I actually knew a lot of ambitious young women who wanted to see parity, who wanted to see women in leadership. And so that was really at odds with this kind of public perception that women's empowerment was kind of only a cause of the left and of the Democratic Party. And so to me, it was, let's make sure that there is a home and a space and a platform for more center-right women who do believe in women's empowerment to get involved in civic life and ultimately run for office. In particular, a lot of these women who are already civically engaged. The last thing I'll kind of say on this is I did also see, I had a lot of friends who did sort of become campaign managers or were legislative directors on Capitol Hill, or they had these senior roles, but they would kind of hit this ceiling or feel that, maybe the next step wasn't the step for them, whether it was consulting where you actually make a lot of the big money, or whether it was, running for office where you have more power. And so, again, started the organization to support them and kind of move them up that power ladder so that more center-right women would have power in political life.
Thank you, Mindy. Larissa, what about you?
I mean, very similar to Mindy in terms of seeing kind of these gaps and especially along the partisan lines. But my organization is nonpartisan, but our outreach and kind of our approach goes after what we call center and right-leaning women. And a lot of that is because on the right side, there are more challenges and there are actually more barriers to women getting engaged for a number of reasons. And we really do see a difference in women that self-identify as left versus women that self-identify as right-leaning in terms of what they're looking for from support and what type of support they can actually find from mentors to financial resources to all these kind of different pieces. And we really didn't see a space that was, I don't want to use the term welcoming per se, because that has a negative connotation, that the other groups are not welcoming. But as you all know, it's very divided right now. It's very personal. And there is kind of this idea that if you don't have certain views as a woman, that you may not be accepted into some other groups to do these trainings or to feel like you can find the support. And so we felt like there was this need on the right to find, to build that space for women to find the training resources, which is how our organization differs from Mindy's in the sense where she focuses a lot on the empowerment side, on the civic engagement side, building these kind of cross communication, these cross conversations that are super vital to how we all discuss politics. On what my organization does is more on the training side and ensuring that women are that identify as center or right-leaning can find those training resources and support network from every level. Because one of the things that I think a lot of people don't realize is that 48% of women in this country identify as center or right-leaning. So even though the narrative is very strong on the left because of the way that they are promote women and have kind of a different type of support network, there is almost half of the women in this country that identify on the other side, and they're not necessarily being reached. And so that's why our organization wants to bring them in, because we really do believe, again, to find these the best policy solutions that reach the most number of people is that you need to have diversity at the table, but diversity of thought as well as background and race and religion and socioeconomic and education and professions, that it's broad. You need all of it. And right now we're just not seeing that happen.
Yeah, so just again, a reminder to the broader audience to drop your questions to Leti if you have any. And before we get to those questions, just if you both referenced it, but if you could speak a little more to this, what are the particular challenges? Because I heard that time and time again in the coalition work that the challenges for right-leaning women are different than the challenges for left-leaning women. I understand that it is a different set of challenges. Could you help us understand what are those challenges? What specifically are those challenges? How are the challenges different? Mindy, you want to start?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the main one is that there's just this assumption baked into kind of the Democratic Party that you have kind of identity groups, and within those groups that you're trying, those groups are part of the overall tent, but they're also just accepted that they're kind of insular, and within them they're trying to elevate each other's kind of power, within them. So women and LGBT women and, kind of every racial and religious and ethnic group. And that's just the way the Democratic Party is kind of structured. within the Republican Party, there is some of that. I mean, there's coalition groups kind of within campaigns, but philosophically, in general, I mean, one of the ways that the two sides differ, and I can kind of talk to my personal belief on this, I don't totally kind of buy into actually either side 100%. But one of the challenges is just that, like, philosophically, there's kind of this idea on the right that that it's like it should be merit based, and it shouldn't so much be focused on identity politics. So while there are pockets or a part of kind of the right-leaning tent that does embrace this idea of more women in leadership, and they invest in it, like there are women member of Congress who are totally invested in it, it's not a party-wide kind of just accepted priority.
Mm-hmm. Larissa, what's your two cents on that?
No, I mean, no, Mindy is correct. One of the things too that I think makes both of us kind of unique in the women's space too is not only do we actually engage from the right side in women's stuff, we actually do the coalition, we work with women, we promote them, which is kind of gives us an interesting perspective. I've also worked for a number of women candidates from every level, from city council all the way up to presidential, and worked for them in elected office. And there are just, to Mindy's point about the lack of party support, but it's also the women in our party as well. There is this kind of inherent need to want to be seen as equal to the men and be respected by the men. So a lot of times our women don't actually engage in what could be described as women's issues. We talk a lot about how every issue is a woman's issue, which also then allows for a lot of the narrative to be taken by the Democrats, which is fine because they have their own kind of objectives. They're pushing on, kind of their own space that they're looking to fill. But because right now, when you talk about women, there is this prevalent narrative from the left that to be a woman, you fit into these like boxes. So that what I feel is that the right tends to buck that. But instead of creating our own narrative of why we should be supporting women, instead we just say we're not going to do what they do. And so therefore we're not going to talk about how we support a woman because she's a woman. We're supporting her because she can win, or because there's another man in the race, or whatever the reason is. Because actually we've seen polling that shows that not only do we have sometimes men that think that a woman can't actually be that conservative, but we also have women that don't support our women because they don't want to be seen as just supporting the woman. So there's a lot of nuance on the right when it comes to how we're viewed. I mean, what's seen as authentic to the left is different from what's authentic to the right, which is why we obviously believe that there needs to be a dedicated training organization for those that identify center and right leaning, because there are just differences. There's differences in what their voting constituents are looking for, what their support network is looking for on both sides. The right is just a much tougher place to navigate because you almost have to prove above and beyond that you will win, that you are conservative, or whatever your policy position is on the spectrum, but that you are the one that is like authentic beyond just even the usual that a woman has to deal with. So even though there are similar challenges on both sides, I mean, being a woman is being a woman in this country, right? Like there's things that no matter what side you're on, you're going to face, but then you add on top of it the challenges that we have from both the party and people that on the right side that are pushing against some of the narrative that is out there that our women also have to fight against.
So I'm glad both of your organizations exist. Leti, did we get some questions?
Yeah, so if I could jump in here. Thank you so much, Mindy and Larissa, for your willingness to have this conversation with us and everybody who's sharing their ideas here. One of the questions is, what are some of the things that you wish your left-leaning friends and family would consider when trying to understand your point of view? It seems to tie in with some of the things that you were just saying there, Larissa and Mindy, but if you could kind of speak to those that you wish could come closer, what would your advice be?
Mindy, I know your time is short, so you go first.
Yeah, I mean, I think my main advice is just to realize that we are not single story individuals, and that everyone that as like, just because like not all Republicans think the same, not all Democrats think the same, not all women think the same. Like we are free thinking individuals, men, women, like whoever you are. And so I think given that, and also we have really different backgrounds and experiences. At the same time, I tend to believe, and right now, kind of my personal passion and what I spend a lot of time on also is trying to fight against polarization and trying to figure out how we transcend polarization to actually solve big societal problems in this country, because we're all losing from the fact that we are so polarized. But I think the key to that is that I believe we all have, like, we also just don't have one identity. So Republican is one identity, Democrat's one identity, progressive, whatever. And there's usually always something that we can find to relate to with somebody else. So particularly here among us as women, there's usually always something. So try to go to that place of common ground. For Kristin and Larissa and me and the coalition, there are lots of things we disagree with, but we work together every day because our area of common ground is that we want to see more women in public office. And so we can work together on that problem. For those of you at the Battery, you're members of the Battery, there's always something that you can find. So for me, like, that's what I would want people to understand, is to not, judge someone immediately or assume, malcontent, or assume that what they stand for just because they have a certain label. Give it time to kind of get to know them, have the conversation. And again, like, if we all get to a point and we are in elective office and we're on different sides, to me, like, this is where I actually think women can be the key to a better future, because on different sides, we tend to be more collaborative, and if we can find those points of common ground, we can put aside a lot of the partisan bickering and actually make progress on issues.
Yes, yes.
I appreciate that, Mindy. And I don't know if we said this explicitly, not everybody, but many have the experience of also juggling work, life, and kids. And I know we're trying to be mindful and supporting you, Mindy, in juggling that tonight in parent-teacher night. So, Larissa, I'll let you take your turn in answering too.
Yeah, I agree with Mindy on her points, but I also think that there is, right now, so much of the polarization is because things have become so personal that we've almost kind of gone to our tribal sides, and we're not actually talking about policies. I would challenge people to talk about, like, how often have they recently talked actually about policy, and not talking points, not things that they've heard in the news, not what the parties are using right now as kind of their attack phrases, but actually talking about the policies that impact you close to home, because usually that's where a lot of the common ground also happens. Is that, having worked on Capitol Hill and having worked with a number of people on both sides, both chambers, lobbyists, campaign, like all of the whole spectrum, I firmly believe that most people in this country really do come from a place of wanting to make it a better place. The difference is they have different political ideologies on how to accomplish that. But when you come from a place of respecting the other side, that even if you may not agree with their approach, you may not agree with their ideology, you may not agree with how they believe the role of government should be, that they're not coming from a place of wanting to cause harm or wanting to do things. And I know that it may seem hard to do that right now because everyone really is kind of just on their sides. But I think, to Mindy's point, if you're trying to get back to the middle, and I say middle not in terms of you're compromising your principles, but compromising on policy, that's where you need to kind of come from, is a place of default that the other side is not trying to do something bad. They don't, as Mindy said, they don't have that intent. So how do you then from that start to talk about why they think the way that they do? Why do they think that policy is the right way to go? Why do you feel that your policy is better than that? To me, it's coming back to that more so than immediately going to, again, the assumption side.
Thank you for sharing that. Leti, I don't know, I know you're managing questions, and I know we have about 2-3 minutes left. Maybe we could, I know we can continue this conversation in the breakout rooms afterwards amongst ourselves, but if Mindy and Larissa, if you're gonna leave this audience with parting words or advice, I also, by the way, am happy if you want to drop your organizations into the chat too, so people can follow up. But what would that be? I'm, of course, encouraging, and I think you would agree with this, everybody to vote in this upcoming election. Most important thing, and at Ignite, we're pushing that using the check out SophiaBot.org. She is the vote bot that makes voting easy. So I'll put that in the chat box, but I think that's the most important thing you can do right now. But Mindy and Larissa would love to hear just parting words to wrap up this conversation, and really want to thank you in advance to say, again, appreciate that we need to have more of these kind of conversations. It gives me hope for our nation and our democracy.
Yeah, so I would add to that, obviously vote, get your friends to vote, can email everybody, text blast them, whatever you have to do. There's 40 days. I think more political participation is better. The other thing is, I think to the point about polarization, and maybe you all don't need to hear this, maybe this is a group who already does this and that's why you're here tonight, but there's always going to be things to get angry about or get frustrated or to kind of get outraged by. And there's certainly a lot to, I'd say, justify that now, no matter what side you're on or what your political beliefs are. But it is, and this is a note for myself as much as everybody else, we have a finite amount of energy every single day. And so channeling, not allowing your energy to get sucked up by that, because any energy that's sucked up by that, especially if it's just and it doesn't actually become productive or constructive, is time and energy that's being taken away from devoting yourself to the areas where you actually can make change. So that would be my parting word, which is to take that finite energy and devote as much of it as you can to doing good, to making progress. And whether that is on a very local level, all politics is, I think Larissa said politics tend to be a lot less polarized, and these polarized lines we see on the federal level just often do not apply in the same way at the local level. Whether it's very locally in your condo board or wherever, all the way up to federal office, it's just channel that finite energy into the areas where you can have constructive progress politically, from the lowest on level to the highest.
Thank you, Mindy. And before you take off, I know you're going to that teacher-parent meeting. If you could drop in the chat any of the links for folks to follow up with your orgs. And again, thank you for creating that space, all of the things that you're working on. And also, I encourage you to follow her on Twitter. I love Mindy Finn's Twitter feed. For a good commentary on what's happening with our democracy, and always maintaining your beliefs, but also being very inclusive about that. So I really appreciate. Larissa, what about you? What are your parting words for this group, if they could have one takeaway directly from you?
I would say that anytime you get the opportunity to talk to someone who is not within your kind of bubble, so to speak, to see it as a learning opportunity, because one of the things that I've learned, which is kind of has helped shape me in my journey, in my political journey. I mean, as I mentioned before, I've lived all over the country. I've worked on campaigns all over the country. And the United States is one of the most geographically, demographically, economically, diverse countries in the world. And so, I know how things can be in San Francisco and California, but I also know that it's not the same in Nebraska, and it's not the same in Maine, and it's not the same in Georgia. And so again, realizing that people come from a different background, a lot of the times, again, their views are being formed by the experiences that they have had. And so to, again, not assume that someone has an ill intent, or that they just are not quite sure how to come to the table, but see it more about learning about where they come from and why. Because again, you can't convince someone or have a respectful conversation with someone if you don't see where they come from first and know how to then tailor your argument to meet theirs, right? That's kind of the argument 101, so to speak. But again, just seeing it as a learning opportunity, not making assumptions, and seeing every opportunity as one that you can either change a mind or at least leave them feeling as though they had a good conversation with you and they met a respectful end.
Thank you, Larissa. Well, I definitely can say that I personally have learned so much in our time working together. Again, I'm reminding the audience, particularly having Larissa and I as co-leads for the coalition, put us both in this interesting position. But I loved having Larissa as my partner in that, from our very different political views, and still being able to not still be. I mean, again, this seems like a crazy thought in these polarizing times, but I've learned a lot from you, and I'm grateful for you taking the time today to share your perspectives, and hope that folks will follow up to know more about your network, which is also giving grants, right, to state-based organizations. So you're also a grant-making entity as well, which is awesome. So thank you for your time, Larissa, and I look forward to hopefully seeing you in person the next time you're out in San Francisco, and you can come visit the Battery outside.
Yeah. Can I breathe out there yet?
Oh, actually,
okay?
yes.
Okay.
Thankfully.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Okay, good. Not red.
Well, as Kristin knows, I keep trying to get up to the Russian River, and I'm like, oh, why is it always burning or flooding? But that's okay. Someday I'll get back.
We're waiting for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much.
Take care. Good night.
What a great discussion. Kristin, Leti, thank you so much for leading us through that. I know we barely scratched the surface with all of that, so if you all have questions, I know our panelists have included their email addresses. We will also share the recording of this along with the links that they shared, so you can follow up with that tomorrow when we send that out, if not tomorrow, Friday. So now we'll sort of move to the next portion, which is our happy hour. So I've invited Carly Daniel, who's one of our amazing bartenders from the Battery, to lead us through a really quick cocktail demo. And I think she's going to show us a spin on a real classic, the Negroni. So Carly,
my favorite.
It's Kristin's favorite. So this came by request of Kristin, but I know Carly put her own spin on it. So I'll let you take it away, Carly.
Can I just call out, Carly, are you from the new library? Are you in the library?
Yeah. I'm filming this in the new library today.
Oh, wow.
Oh, it's so pretty.
It's gorgeous. We open it up. Yeah, today we're going to be making a riff on a classic Negroni. The Negroni was created in Florence in 1919, and it's been one of the most well-known aperitivo cocktails in the bar world since. Now, because it's equal parts, it's one of the best cocktails to make at home. It's super simple, and it's only made of 4 ingredients. And so you're going to have a gin, a sweet vermouth, a bitter, which is usually Campari, and an orange twist. And I'm going to be using a bar jigger to measure everything out, but if you don't have one at home, you can always use a tablespoon. 2 tablespoons equal 1 ounce. All right. And we're going to be using a Yari to mix ours in, but again, if you don't have one at home, a pint glass works just fine. The gin we'll be putting in our Negroni today is Hendrick's. It's a delicious, super popular gin. It's made in small batches by a female distiller in Scotland. She was previously a chemist before she started making gin, and she was inspired by tea parties and rose gardens. So aside from the juniper, you're going to find a lot of rose notes and cucumber from like cucumber sandwiches. And we'll be adding 1 ounce of this to our mixing glass. Here we go. Now for the bitter, traditionally it's Campari, but I decided to mix it up a little bit, and we'll be using Cocchi Rosa. Now, if you're not familiar with Cocchi Rosa, it's an Italian red wine-based variation of Cocchi Americano, which is a classic Italian aperitif. It's bright, it's lively, it's gently bittersweet, and it features notes of citrus zest and rose petals. So it'll pair perfectly with a Hendrick's. And with this one, we'll be adding 1 ounce as well. Now, the fun thing about Cocchi Rosa is it's super light, and it's just about like an Aperol substitute. So it goes really well in sodas, spritzes, on the rocks. I keep a bottle of it in my fridge at home. It's great for day drinking. And now on to the vermouth. For this Negroni, we're going to be using Punta Mess. Punta Mess is the bitter cousin of more commonly used sweet vermouths like Dolin Rouge or Carpano Antica. The name means 1.5, and it refers to the flavor makeup, which is essentially 1 part sweet vermouth and 1/2 part herbal bitter. So imagine taking a bottle of your like sweet vermouth and mixing it with 1/2 bottle of Campari. Punta Mess is what you get. And we're going to also add 1 ounce of this to our drink. Here we go. Now, if you ever wanted to jazz up your like Manhattans or Martinez or even like a Vucare, Punta Mess has enough spice to add that versatility to it and give those classic drinks a really good kick. All right, on to the fun part. We're going to mix the cocktail. So you'll go ahead and add a scoop of ice to it. And to stir the cocktail, I'm going to be using the thin end of a bar spoon. But if you're like me and misplace them at home all the time, or you don't have one, a chopstick or even a metal straw works perfectly. And when you're stirring your drinks, you don't want to over stir it. So typically I feel the glass until it's kind of chilled, but you don't want it to frost over. A good rule is about 25 seconds or 25 stirs.
My favorite part about the Negroni is that I can always remember the recipe.
Me too. 1, 1, and 1.
1 and 1.
Carly, did you say Hendrix is a female-owned company?
It is, yeah. Their distiller, her name is Leslie Gracie, is their master distiller. She comes up with every single flavor that they have.
Wow.
Yeah, she has I think they call it like the Gin Castle in Scotland. And it's
amazing.
She has a special locked cabinet with all her versions of gin and 2 different greenhouses where she grows all the herbs for her gins as well.
Can we have her come? Let's get her on this program.
That would be phenomenal. I'm sure we could
I was going to say a post-COVID battery trip.
Absolutely. Yes. We're going to the castle.
I know. I'm quite serious. I'm going to reach out to her. We can just Zoom. Then we can do a special trip later.
I think before she was making gin, she was making different flavors for pharmaceutical companies to like mask the bitterness in their drinks.
Wow.
Or in their medicines, yeah.
Is it pretty rare to have like a female founder for an alcohol
It is.
company?
There's not too many around. It's a bit of a boys club for the distilling world, but I think there's another one I know of, and she makes Casa Dragones, which is that really beautiful tequila.
Mina, you're on mute. Can you unmute yourself?
Let's do it. Now you should be able to, Mina.
Yes, hi. I just was going to make a call out. There is a Battery member that she's a female, a wonderful female who started Sia Scotch.
Yep,
she's a very good friend, so I just want to call that out.
Awesome.
And at the time, she is the only female distiller for Scotch in Scotland, and she's a San Francisco local. And her name is Corinne Costello.
You just gave me an idea, Mina. Maybe for all of our, our cocktail pieces in the Women in the Battery thing, we feature a cocktail run by a female founder.
Absolutely.
If you want to connect with me afterwards, I'll make the connection so that you can join.
I think it's on brand, on theme.
On brand. She's exceptional. So.
I love that Scotch too. It's really well balanced, and it's got like these delicate vanilla notes to it. It's a really beautiful Scotch.
She actually developed it with a panel of women for about a year to suit the female palate, or kind of come up with something that women really were drawn to.
That's so great.
They did a great
of it. So yeah, definitely.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Well, we'll get to straining our cocktails. I'm going to be using a julep strainer. But again, if you don't have one, a tea strainer or even a big spoon will work. You just don't want to get any ice into your glass. Strain that in.
Yum.
Such a pretty color.
Yeah, I love that it's not bright red, because usually Campari will change the color of the drink, but the Punta Mess makes it look a little richer. And after you've got your cocktail in your glass, you're going to go ahead and add fresh ice to your drink. So we add fresh ice to the drink for the same reason we don't shake it. You don't want to water down your drink. You don't want anything like kind of floating in the top. It preserves the silky texture of all the spirits. There we go.
Love the big rock.
Oh yeah, regular ice works great, but if you want to take your time with your cocktail, a big rock melts slower.
Yeah.
And so you usually sip it, out in the garden or out on a really sunny patio. And the last change up on this Negroni is from an orange peel to a grapefruit peel.
Oh.
I chose grapefruit because it adds a slight bit of additional bitterness. And also, grapefruit pairs really well with quinine, and the Coqui Rosa has some minor notes of it. And let's see, when you're peeling your cocktail, or peeling your grapefruit, I recommend a vegetable peeler just because you can get a really easy handle on it and you're less likely to cut yourself, but a apple core or even a paring knife works great. And the key to a good peel is making sure it's even, and also so that you want to make sure not to get any of the flesh under the grapefruit. So I can show you, this is a good peel. It's almost like the same color on both sides. You can see the pores of it. And this is a peel that's a little too thick. So you can see a lot of the flesh. And the reason you don't want the flesh in your cocktail is because it holds water and sometimes juice. And if you squeeze that into your cocktail, it'll make it cloudy. It'll change the whole flavor. And what you want out of them is just the oil that's in the rind. And so you take it in between your fingers with the outer part of the peel facing the glass. And when you squeeze it, you do a gentle motion over the glass. And this is just so you get an even distribution of the oil. And once you're done with that, you don't toss your peel. You can either twist it up and drop it in your glass, or sometimes I like to just fold it in half and crease it and then put it in like a little flag.
Nice.
Yeah. And that way it doesn't sit on the top of the glass so it doesn't bump your face when you drink it. And voila, there we have it. The Rose of March, which translates into bitter rose. It's a delicate, low sweetness, low ABV, rose forward Negroni.
I love it. Thank you so much, Carly. That's my favorite drink.
Oh, I'm so glad. It was a delight to design it and kind of come up with it last week.
And I think we're going to feature it at the Penthouse. Is that right?
We are. Yeah, we'll have it up there. We'll have all the ingredients for it. It really is a fantastic sunshine drink. And because it's so low ABV, you can have 3 or 4 of them without getting into too much trouble.
Wait. Is this true? I'm saying this as an experienced Negroni drinker, that you have 3 different, you have a lot packed into one of those.
Yeah.
I do. Typically the Campari has slightly higher alcohol content, but because I use Coqui Rosa, Coqui Rosa 15%, and Punta Mess is, I think, the same amount.
Okay.
And so these are slightly higher than wine. And then, then all you have really is 1 ounce of Hendrick's at 44%. So it keeps it really moderate.
Good to know.
So, Kristin, that's why they were a little smoother on Friday.
Exactly.
Got it. Thank you so much, Carly. We cannot wait to go to the library. We hear that it's so beautiful in there. It looks like it from where you are.
Oh, stunning. Imagine the shiny green lacquer that's in the green room, but in pink and all over the place.
Oh.
Yeah,
gorgeous.
Beautiful. So talk about coming together. Cocktails always bring you together across anything. So thank you so much, Carly.
Oh yeah, my pleasure. Happy to do it.
We'll be ordering it from you in person soon.
Oh, fantastic. I'm going to be really excited to make them. I always love seeing people enjoy the cocktails that I've made and getting really, just stoked on them.
I'm gonna make one right now. I mean, after our next section. So thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Colleen, are we gonna put it back to you?
Sure. Yeah. So we thought we would. Originally, the idea was that we'd split up into breakout rooms so we could talk in smaller groups. But I think that we're a small enough group at this point with a couple of people that have dropped off that if you want to stick around, we'll kind of open it up for dialogue about the panel discussion, other topics, questions for me, questions for Kristin and Leti, ideas for Women of the Battery. So if you feel comfortable and want to take yourself off mute and put your video on, you should have the capability to do that now. And we can start, I think, Kristin, this was really your, idea to really spearhead something that was politically focused because of what you do. And so was there anything that surprised you about the panel? These women were your colleagues, so probably not, but.
Yeah, I'm more curious. Again, I've worked with them both, and as I said, it was kind of a highlight for me working in the coalition because these were some of the few civil conversations that I was having in my life with my Republican colleagues, where I wasn't really getting that in other areas of my life. Even in my family, it was challenging. So I just felt like that's what I wanted to share with the group today, because I just feel like I'm a little more sensitive to understanding the different ways that things are perceived. I'll give you a concrete example. After the DNC, I don't know if any of you watched that. Raise your hand if you watched the DNC and the RNC, the Democratic National Convention. I thought, that I was very inspired is a strong word, but I was very moved that the framing that Biden gave in his speech was very, more uplifting. Like, he talked about returning the country to the light. And I had been sharing that with my colleagues, and they had a little bit of a different perception of that, because for them, that language made it feel like if you're not if you're not a Democrat, then you're in the dark, and that it was very condescending. And I just thought that was I thought, okay, I didn't think of it like that. So I have a lot of moments where I'm able to just a little bit take in that perspective, which I have appreciated. So I'd love to hear from.
Just as a logistical jump in, I think something we wanted to do is to also give each other the chance to actually talk and introduce ourselves and meet new people this way as much as we possibly can. So if we want to, we can either have folks introduce themselves as they make a comment, or we could go around and introduce ourselves. What do you think?
I think we should go around. It's such a small group. I think I'd love to hear, and maybe you could share, just say in a sentence or something, if you were able to just comment on your experience today, that would be great.
And ideas for future are also what we're looking for, so we can create kind of these convenings going forward.
Yeah.
So I have found, if you don't mind, it helps to just start saying names. So I see Julia in front of me.
Yeah. Hi. So Julia Campbell. I'm a partner in Casada Architecture, and I think what I find really interesting is particularly coming from the UK, where you pick a party again, but you don't pick propositions, or you don't really have a say in the propositions. You have, you basically you vote along party lines. I just found the whole election really interesting, because I have a daughter who's studying political science at UC Berkeley. She's in her 4th year. And so she's worked for Malia Cohen and Scott Wiener and all sorts of, internships. And so I had this kind of very skewed view of what is the right thing to be thinking and doing, etc. And what I realize is that I don't know that many people who are Republican, who would vote Republican. And I don't know if you've all seen the social media, the social the Social Dilemma movie. But what really struck me was this kind of polarization that the media is really influencing, and we're all like locked into these bubbles of just seeing particular media. And so I struggle with it, because it's like, do you talk about politics? Do you not talk about politics? How do you influence actual change? It's just, and particularly being coming from England, I feel like I'm like an outsider, but I've committed to also being, the US is my home. So, it's just a really tough time right now, So that's a lot to, that's me rambling, but, just lots of influences, but, it's also really good to hear different points of view, because otherwise you feel like you're talking to yourself the whole time.
Yeah, Julia, I work at Berkeley, and I often, to be totally honest with you all, I feel like it can be a bit of an echo chamber.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
it's really nice to kind of get out of that at times. In fact, I was in a conversation with someone based in Geneva, where there isn't even a president. There's a council, and she's like, it's a weird time to be an American right now, and just even understanding that. Just was interesting. And Kristin, you mentioned that you had your political awakening also outside of the US, right? There's something to be said about even having that broader perspective, let alone getting off the coasts, but getting outside of the US too.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from, how about Carolina? Is it Carolina or Carolina?
Thank you for asking, Kristin. I appreciate that. It's Carolina.
Carolina, yeah.
This is my first Battery virtual event. So,
wow.
Okay. Yeah.
Honored.
Well, thank you for having me. I love the cocktail thing, and I apologize. I'm eating fries on the side because I had a few.
No apologies. I'm jealous.
So I think to Leti's point, I'm from New York, but originally from Peru. And my parents left during a very challenging political time called the Shining Path. So they have strong views on certain political groups. So my parents were quite conservative and Republican. They then became more moderate and now are hardline Democrats. But in this conversation, it just got me thinking in terms of my own identity as a Latina, and someone else who was on the panel that spoke about that. I realized even in my own job, I work in venture, but a social impact venture organization, other people had people in their families that identified as Republican or voted Republican and didn't feel comfortable even saying that in our very kind of woke environment. Which struck me. So I think for me, I was really excited to participate in this conversation because I do think it is so polarizing. It is becomes so personal that what my big takeaway, one of the panelists was talking about finding common ground. Because ultimately, the way that I want to walk in the world is that all of us have good intentions. Right? We may come at it in a different way, but even seeing my own family's evolution of how they identify politically. So I appreciate the conversation a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Nancy, we didn't get to answer one of the questions that you asked, but it was a good one. Would you mind introducing yourself and sharing it and your reaction?
Hi, everybody. Nancy.
Hi, Nancy.
And hi, Kristin. And I was actually the board chair for a number of years for Ignite. So very interested in women in politics. And of course, Ignite is nonpartisan. And it was very important to us to toe that line. My question was how they defined center and right-leaning women. And I think, and I wish that, I missed the first 10 to 15 minutes and I apologize, maybe they did, but just because, we live in a bubble here in San Francisco, we just do. And, I consider myself pretty moderate, and I'm moderate until I talk to, my husband's family from Virginia, or, until I talk to other people. And so I think that, how people define, who they are, and also just that writ large, what these leaders, how they're defining the folks that they're working with, I think is important to better understand. Just as I was coming home tonight, I heard Cindy McCain saying that she's coming out and to support Biden because ultimately she said my husband was we were Republicans, but above all we're Americans. And I think that one of the things that I wish that we had gotten to in this conversation was about the fact that there are so many Republicans who do feel strongly about America and American ideals and understand that they are trying to address issues and problems just from a different with using different policies, but always trying to move us forward and make us better. And that, in my opinion, is not what's happening at the national level right now. And I think Mindy wasn't she one of the originators of Never Trump?
Yeah, she was. I was saying, I learned that she was responsible for the
hashtag. And so I wish, again, I mean, this was something, it was like the taste of it. Maybe we need to do a 2.0. But I think it's important that be lifted up as well, that this is not, it's not just the Republicans and the Democrats, it's that the Republican Party has been hijacked and taken down a dark path, in my opinion.
Well, in my experience with the coalition, working with these two and the other women, the women that feel, and you heard about the challenges that Republican women feel working, particularly in this kind of coalition environment, that I will just say that it is harder for the women, any women who actually really support Trump, meaning it's easier, the Republican women who tend to be in this space, the coalition space, are more like Mindy, like what you're saying, the moderate, like they're still holding on to their Republican identity, but aren't necessarily supporting Trump. And it's really hard for them. It's hard for them to be part of the party, and that is why these spaces are a little bit safer. But it's harder for someone like Larissa, who, she was on the Trump transition team. She's not like overly enthusiastic about him, but she's more on that conservative side, and it's harder for her to participate in the